North America. Summer 2025 outlook. The North American economy is projected to slow in 2025 amid elevated uncertainty. Global forecasts, e.g. IMF, OECD, have been sharply downgraded due to recent U.S. tariff measures and other trade tensions. For example, the IMF estimates U.S. GDP growth around 1.8% in 2025 and Canadian growth about 1.4%. IMF.org. IMF.org. With Mexico's economy roughly flat or mildly contracting. Inflation across the region is easing but remains above pre-pandemic norms. Central banks are on alert. Policy rates are high, Fed is almost equal to 5.5%, BOC 2.75%, Banxico 8.5%, and poised to be gradually cut if inflation continues to slow. OECD.org. bankofcanada.ca. Labor markets remain relatively tight in the US and Mexico, unemployment near 4% and 2 to 3%, though slowing, while Canada's unemployment has risen to 6.9%. bankofcanada.ca. Cross-border trade is a key vulnerability. US tariffs on steel, autos and other goods, and retaliatory measures, threaten North American supply chains and could curb exports region-wide. IMF.org. OECD.org. GDP growth. North American growth is expected to be modest. The US is forecast to grow about 1 to 1.8% in 2025. IMF.org. federalreserve.gov. Canada around 1 to 1.5%. IMF.org. bankofcanada.ca. And Mexico roughly 0 to 0.4%. Reuters.com. OECD.org. Regionally, GDP will be weighed down by trade friction and investment weakness. OECD.org. IMF.org. Inflation. Inflation is falling from pandemic highs but above targets. US CPI is 2.3%, April 2025. BLS.gov. Near the Fed's 2% goal. Canada's CPI was 1.7% in April. bankofcanada.ca. Mexico's CPI is around 3.6 to 3.9%. banxico.org.mx. OECD.org. And trending down. Core, underlying, inflation in all three economies is easing as commodity and shelter costs moderate. Interest rates. Policy rates are high by historical standards. The Fed has held the federal funds rate near 5.25 to 5.5% and signals cuts later in 2025 as inflation cools. federalreserve.gov. Canada's policy rate is 2.75%. BOC held it steady in June. bankofcanada.ca. Further cuts are possible if growth falters. Mexico's Banxico has cut its rate to 8.5% as of May, and guidance suggests lowering toward 7% by year-end. OECD.org. Labor markets. Unemployment remains low in the US, 4%, and Mexico, 2.6%. PhiladelphiaFed.org. OECD.org. Reflecting still strong labor demand. However, job growth is decelerating. Forecasters expect U.S. non-farm payroll gains to slow, around 140,000-150,000/month in 2025, and the unemployment rate to drift up toward mid-4%. PhiladelphiaFed.org. Canada's labor market has weakened under trade shocks. Unemployment rose to 6.9% by April. bankofcanada.ca. And job cuts have emerged especially in manufacturing and trade-facing sectors. Trade and supply chains. Deep integration via USMCA ties the region's outlook to trade policy. Recent U.S. tariffs, steel, autos, etc., and retaliatory measures have injected uncertainty. For example, OECD projections assume many exports now face 25% tariffs, depressing Mexican exports and U.S.-Canada trade. OECD.org. bankofcanada.ca. Cross-border supply disruptions, in autos, lumber, agriculture, etc., are expected to slow export growth in 2025. Conversely, Any de-escalation of tariffs or policy uncertainty could significantly boost investment and trade. Overall, moderate growth with downside risks is anticipated. North America's expansion in early 2025 is broadly projected to be sluggish. Central banks across the region are likely to maintain restrictive stance into mid-2025, then begin easing if inflation and labor market pressures abate. Trade policy remains the wild card. Additional tariff actions could trigger a sharper slowdown, while trade policy relief would lift prospects. United States. Growth. The U.S. economy is cooling from its post-pandemic boom. Forecasters, Fed projections, IMF, Philadelphia Fed, put 2025 GDP growth in the 1.4 to 1.8% range. IMF.org.